The governments of both the United States and Azerbaijan are characterizing the U.S. Azerbaijan Strategic Charter as a landmark bilateral agreement that ushers in a new era of strategic partnership between Azerbaijan and the United States. That tone is like nothing I've ever heard in all of my years working with Azerbaijan as a U.S. official. Now, on the one hand, you could argue, well, the substance of the charter is not that different from what Azerbaijan and the U.S. have been working on for a long time. For example, the key pillars of the charter are regional connectivity, so that means the Trump Road for International Peace and Prosperity, or the Zangezur Corridor, and the Middle Corridor. That's something the U.S. and Azerbaijan have worked on since the administration of President Bill Clinton, which is what brought my involvement to the region with our cooperation to help the countries and companies agree to develop the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline and the South Caucasus natural gas pipeline. And of course, as we all know, that gas pipeline has grown into the southern corridor that delivers Azerbaijani gas to Europe. So we had been working on those projects for a while. But what's different is the tone coming out of the Trump administration, suggesting a long-term commitment by the U.S. In terms of investment and U.S. business presence on these regional connectivity projects. A second pillar that is similar to what the U.S. and Azerbaijan have done in the past, but also new, is the one for economic and technological investment. Energy is a key component in the Strategic Charter in this pillar, which, as I just said, is something the U.S. and Azerbaijan have worked on together since the mid-1990s. But I think what's different is now there's talk of cooperation more widely on electricity and on civilian nuclear energy and critical minerals. That's new and positive. Also, something new in terms of technological cooperation is artificial intelligence. And my guess is this will involve U.S. investments in building data centers, as well as a technological workforce. So there's new that's building on the old of what the U.S. and Azerbaijan have done for decades. A third important pillar is security and defense cooperation. Here in particular, the Charter emphasizes a new phase in security. It says, including potential for U.S. Defense sales such as patrol boats and personal protective equipment. Now, that's not new. Dating back to my days working on Azerbaijan as ambassador in 2011, 2012, and the decade before that, we were providing Azerbaijan those sorts of things. But now I think the U.S. is going to look at additional forms of military cooperation, although that's unspecified. Also on security and defense, it talks about increasing U.S. cooperation with Azerbaijan on counterterrorism, which we've been doing for a long time, and humanitarian demining. But what's new is U.S. commitment to cooperate with the Azerbaijani government on cybersecurity. So in summary, the strategic partnership builds on decades of U.S.-Azerbaijan cooperation, but with a new emotion and a new mutual commitment to lifting the relationship to one of a strategic partnership. Part of the U.S. motivation, I think the strongest motivation by President Trump is to portray himself and the United States as brokering a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now, we all know that months before, in fact, years before President Trump hosted President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan in the White House on August 8th of last year, Azerbaijan and Armenia had been involved in intensive negotiations, and in fact, in March of last year, had finalized the text of their peace treaty. But having said that, President Trump's personal engagement and the strategic charter, I think, will help accelerate and re-energize that peace treaty process between Azerbaijan and Armenia and help get the agreement over the end line. Finally, the strategic charter is a reflection of how President Trump views U.S. business, U.S. investment, U.S. business presence in a region, in this case the South Caucasus, as playing an important role in expanding the U.S.'s strategic influence and also deterring other countries from meddling or from destabilizing the region. And I have in mind, when it comes to Azerbaijan, the possibility that Iran or Russia would try to destabilize the Armenia-Azerbaijan peace process. So President Trump's interest is not, though, so much in containing Russian influence or containing Iranian nefariousness or in containing even Chinese influence. I think what President Trump wants to do is make sure the South Caucasus remains stable and that no outside power can dominate it, so that there's space for U.S. investors to work with Azerbaijani partners to generate wealth and jobs and economic growth, as well as profits for both sides' companies.